Hello. I get asked very often how I got into user research, how I got to this point in my career, and for advice for people who are either transitioning into from academia into user research or a variety of other places into user research. So what I wanted to do was actually put together a video because it seems a lot more helpful than me trying to write out LinkedIn messages that basically sound the same. What I will do in this video is explain a little bit about my journey into user research and how I got to this point in my career where I am right now, as well as some advice for people who are looking to transition into the field, regardless of kind of like where you are transitioning from, how much experience you have. I will kind of talk through that. You might also experience some of my pets in the video. I apologize in advance, but my cats and dog are seeking attention a lot today. So there isn't much that I could do to keep them away, but hopefully they aren't that disruptive. Let's dive in. Hi, I'm Nikki. I've been a user researcher for over 8 years now, maybe about 9. And I specialize in qualitative user research. So more of the interview kind of side rather than the quantitative research, which is like the heavier number side of user research. And I also specialize in career development for user researchers. Right now, I don't work full-time at any companies. I do some consultancy work, but mainly I coach people in the realm of user research and help companies with upskilling their colleagues and bringing research to their organizations. So that's where I am now. And I actually started by getting my master's in psychology. So I did not get my master's in psychology to join the user research field. When I got my master's in psychology, I had a full intent to go and get my PhD in clinical psychology. During that time, when I got my master's in psych, I worked at a mental hospital because I was in like clinical and social and clinical psych, but I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. So that was like the end goal for me. Was to move forward, get my PhD, become a clinical psychologist, and work in a mental hospital. During the 2 years that I worked in that mental hospital, I have so much respect for people who can make proper boundaries, but I was not one of those people. So I actually burnt out. I was unable to properly make boundaries with my patients, and the work was really tough for me to kind of deal with. And I didn't have the right support system at that time to properly deal with my emotions and my reactions to that work. So I ended up saying, okay, this might not be the job for me, even though I've dreamed about it for the past 15 years. So I went on a little bit of a search, and I was fortunate that I went to a party and one of my friends mentioned user experience. And this to me felt like something that I could potentially explore. So what I did is I took General Assembly way back when. I took the digital marketing course at General Assembly. Please don't ask. That's a whole nother video. And I also took the UX course at General Assembly. I paid a lot of money to find out that I suck at design, even though I kind of already knew that I sucked at design because I'm not particularly great at any sort of visualizations. But in that General Assembly course, I learned about user research. So we have a day or two about user research, and I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do because it combines my listening skills, my curiosity, my empathy, and it doesn't require me to, draw or create something that looks nice and works well. I will say, just as a caveat, General Assembly was not user research specific. So if you're thinking about a user research specific kind of course, General Assembly does not have that. So if you were I went into it saying I didn't know what UX was, so I went into it kind of just like exploring what UX was. And as I said, I found out that design was not for me. So I was kind of bummed that it was only like one day of user research. That was the part that I enjoyed the most. And yeah, but what I can say is that it taught me as well, like some basic understanding of like product and tech, in the sense of like, I kind of started to understand iterations, like I had never heard that word before. I think they talked about like agile and waterfall, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool new things. And now I'm like, oh, this is interesting stuff. So at least what it did is it kind of invited me into the tech and product industry a little bit more. But I would not recommend going to a UX course, like a general UX course, if you were looking for user research. As a user researcher, you do need to understand things like UX, like product management, like engineering to a certain degree, but not to that level of understanding. So for instance, like I understand what product managers do and what their goals are. I don't understand necessarily like how 100% they operate. But I understand like what their like responsibilities are, what their goals are. Same with designers. And I have some knowledge of like design principles. So from there, this is where it gets fun. I was like, okay, I want to be a user researcher. And about like 9 years ago or so, there weren't many like dedicated user research roles. It was still like slightly behind when it came to other roles such as product management, design. So what I had to do is I applied to a bunch of positions as like user researcher. And every single time what happened is they were like, we need a case study or a portfolio or whatever. And I was like, what is this? This is terrible and terrifying. I've never had to do this before. So what happened is I had to go and create a case study. And this is probably what I get asked the most about, is kind of like how to get started in the field of user research. And how to get that like first case study done so that you're able to like apply for jobs and go through the full like application process. So in the description of this video, I am linking a few different resources of kind of like how to get started and how to break in to the field. And within those resources, there are some volunteer opportunities. So one route that you can go, it's not a route that I went because it wasn't available when I started getting into user research, but one route that you could go is volunteering for projects as a user researcher. So that is something that you can do. There's also something called hackathons. And this is where groups of people get together and work on a really cool idea over like a weekend or something. I've done several of them and they're really, really fun. But they're generally speaking like events that take place. So they're not like always happening. But that's something else that you can look for. The route that I went, because it was the only one that was available to me at the time, was a personal project. And I know that there's a lot of back and forth on like whether or not you should do a personal project or not, and how well that stands up to other people who have experience, all of that kind of stuff. From me, like, so I've been a hiring manager for a few years, and I've hired junior positions. And if I see that somebody who did not have experience took the initiative to choose like a personal project that meant something to them. So not just like, I mean, if Facebook means a lot to you, of course, like go for it. But like they didn't just take like Facebook and like do research on it. Like if you're going to do something, it's like take like, I don't know, like the bullying aspect of Facebook, or, like the like fake news aspect of Facebook, take something a little bit more specific. Cause what I don't recommend is taking something like generic, doing research on it, and like kind of going from there. So like a lot of people will take like the most common apps, like Instagram. So like, how do we make Instagram's like sharing capability better? And like, yeah, that's okay. But I think that what might be more interesting is something like, imagine that you've created content in the past, and it's like, how do we make Instagram better for content creators, right? So like try and find something that you actually care about that's a little bit more specific. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll walk you through a few of the projects that I did to give you an understanding of what I mean. So what I did, my two main projects were, I love World of Warcraft, which is a video game. You can look it up. If you haven't started playing, don't. It's rather addictive if you're into that kind of stuff. It's rather boring for other people. My husband hates it. So World of Warcraft used to have this like app. And I had a bunch of friends, and we used the app. And so what I did is I did kind of like a usability, like very basic usability test of the app. Like my knowledge was not one that could like do complex things in user research. So this was like a basic, very basic usability test. I can tell you that I messed it up. I can tell you that I probably asked so many leading questions, but I showed a basic understanding of usability and what usability testing meant. So what I did is I took this World of Warcraft app and I asked 7 of my friends, so 7 people who used it on a regular basis. So that showed a level of knowledge of segmentation. So oftentimes you get, for usability tests, you only need to talk to 5 people. That's not necessarily true. There's some fine print within that. It's for 5 to 7. You have to talk to 5 to 7 people per segment. There are lots of ways to segment data. It can be age, it can be gender, like so demographics, so location, but you can also do it by like habit or action. So I talked to my friends who were all kind of actually in the Northeast area of the United States. So like New England, New York, that tri-state area as well. And they used the app like at least 2 or 3 times a week. So those are 2 ways to segment. So I did show a level of segmentation when I went into this. So that was really great. And so what I did is I came up with goals. So I wanted to like evaluate the overall user experience of the World of Warcraft app. So that was too much. There was a lot on that app, like a lot of stuff that you could do. A lot of it didn't make sense. So what I would say to anybody who's seeking advice is choose like five different actions that people can do, like the most important ones, and then have them do it. So what I did is I talked to those 5 or 6 people and I ran a usability test. I recorded it. So what I did is a few of them were in person, but a few of them were over Zoom. And I asked them tasks. So I can't remember. So World of Warcraft has changed the app completely. I think they depreciated it as it is and have a totally separate new one. But there were things like view your character's stats, like in the sense of like their like armor and like what you could upgrade to next for that would be better. Or view your auction in the auction house. So like there were those kinds of tasks that I asked them to do. And I knew about task success, which is whether or not somebody can actually complete a task. So that's what I measured. I measured task success for each of the tasks that I asked the participants. And based on that, I came up with recommendations on how World of Warcraft, if they had listened to me, could have made some of these usability features like a little bit easier. So like, for instance, when you went onto your auction house, it was really hard to find your auctions versus other people's like auctions. Like that UI was very confusing. And so I reported on the fact that people really struggled when trying to like differentiate between their auctions and like other auctions that they had bid on, right? So I recommended like some sort of like clear delineation between the two. I didn't know what that is. I'm not a designer. I can't design it, but there's confusion and people get frustrated. So it needs to be fixed. So that is pretty much what I did for my first project. Like, no, like a lot of people don't know about World of Warcraft in the sense of like what it really is, but I cared about it. I loved it. I loved talking about it. And then my other project that I did was more of a generative research project. So I really recommend 2 case studies if you can. One of them, that evaluative research, which is evaluating an app, so usability testing on World of Warcraft. The second one being a generative research project. So that's more of like one-on-one interviews and discovering new things about people. So another thing, if you know me, I love writing. I am an avid fiction reader and writer. And so I had a writing group that I was part of, actually a few different writing groups that I was part of. Each group had like anywhere from like 7 to like 12 people in it. And what I wanted to do, because I was genuinely curious about this, I wanted to learn. So background, I do National Novel Writing Month every year. And that's in November. And in November, you write 1,700 words a day to end with a 50,000 word novel at the end of November. So you start November 1st and end November 30th. 30 days has November, yes, with a 50,000 word novel. But outside of National Novel Writing Month, I didn't really know how to track my progress for my writing. And so I was curious in understanding how other people thought about and tracked their writing progress. So I'm not evaluating anything. Like, I didn't have an app to look at. I didn't really have like a website or something in mind that I wanted people to like talk about, like a specific product. So that was very generative research. So I was just trying to understand how people thought about tracking writing progress and a little bit about how they currently did it and how they would like improve that process. So what I did is I recruited people from my writing group. So these were all fiction writers. These were all long form fiction writers. So obviously there are short stories and there are like more novel length stories. There are also like middle ground novella stories, but almost all of the people that I spoke to were in that like long form writing. So like 60,000 plus words, like, so a very standard like novel. And they were all in New York City because we all met like within the city because we all lived there. All fiction writers. We didn't have any nonfiction writers. And all people who wrote on a regular basis. So again, I demonstrated on the knowledge of segmentation, and I'm just saying this a few times because it's really important to demonstrate that knowledge. So that is really, so that was really great. So again, something that I cared about, not even a product in mind, right? And so what I did is I scheduled, I think they were 45 minutes. So they were 45-minute interviews because I was scared that I wouldn't know what to talk about for more than 45 minutes. Which at that point I didn't. What I did is I interviewed people. So I tried to ask open-ended questions. I will link to TED W as an open-ended question technique within the description of this video. So I asked them open-ended questions about what they thought about when it came to like tracking their writing progress and how they currently did it and what their pain points were and what they were looking for when they were tracking their writing progress. I also asked them if they tracked their writing progress. That's a good one. So anybody who wasn't tracking their writing progress, I didn't really talk to. I only talked to people who were currently like tracking their writing progress. All these were recorded and in person. I think I spoke to 10 to 12 people, probably, because with a generative research, we need a larger sample size. What I did is I did those interviews and I synthesized the information. What I mean by synthesizing the information is I pulled together things that a lot of them had said that were similar. So for instance, a lot of people, I'm trying to remember some of the like insights that I gleaned from this. A lot of people were, right. So a lot of people had problems like they wanted to hit a certain word count and they wanted to write a certain amount per day. But a lot of the products that were out there, like it just had like a lump sum right? So it wasn't like hit this many words a day to get to your total of 10,000 words a week. So they struggled a lot with kind of like having to do the math and thinking about that, and also understanding kind of like the words per minute was something that was interesting to them, because they wanted to see on average how long it took them to write a certain amount of words, so that they could better plan when they could write, because a lot of these people were writing on the side of full-time jobs. So that was something that was really interesting, and a lot of people said that. So like, I think almost everybody said that. So like what I did is I was like, that sounds like it's important because a lot of people said that. So then in my findings, I was like, this is really important. I would recommend that a product that would be looking at this would be able to have this type of functionality, because people are really looking to plan out their writing correctly. Now, the biggest thing when it comes to writing insights, especially with qualitative research, is not just saying like, I just demonstrated this. It's not just saying like, people need something that counts how many words they do per minute. So in your case studies, try not to just say that. That is fine, but you need to say why, right? Because nobody cares unless you tell them why. So people need to know how many words per minute they write, so that they can plan how long it will take them to write and fit it into their schedule. Without that, they won't write. Like as a writer, like I know that if I don't have enough time to write, I just won't write, and that can be really disappointing. So really articulating the so what's, the because, and the why. So yeah, I created those two case studies. They weren't perfect, but then I went back and I started applying to jobs. I would say I applied to over 70 jobs before I landed my first user research internship. In that internship, I was also wireframing. I would recommend trying not to do that, but the nature of what it looked like 9 years ago, there was a lot of like hybrid combined roles. They soon stopped asking me to wireframe when they saw my wireframe, so that was kind of nice. What I would say is, and then from there, I moved into more full-time roles. So I did several full-time roles. Then I switched over to freelance work because I wanted to see what it was like to be my own boss. When you are transitioning into user research, I get this question a lot. Try to get into a full-time role that has at least another researcher or a manager with research experience. So be sure that you ask that in the interview. My first role, I was the only researcher and my manager had no research experience. And so I was tasked with building a framework and a research practice and doing all the things like building personas and journey maps without really knowing how to do any of this. And it was really tough because like you can read a lot, but there's a big difference between reading and actually applying the information and then being able to get feedback on that. So like, I was like, like shooting in the dark. Like I was kind of like, okay, like this is our persona. What do you guys think? And like, nobody could really give me that much feedback on it. It was horrendous. But that's okay. We all start somewhere. The thing is that it's really important to try and get like some sort of feedback loop, whether that's within that organization, or if they don't have research expertise within the organization, ask for outside mentorship and find somebody that will give you continuous feedback on your work so that you can learn. You will hit a wall. This is the same for like freelancing. If you can do some freelancing work, so if you have family or friends or some sort of connections that allows you to do freelancing work to gain that experience, then by all means, go for it. But I will say that it's very hard to work in a vacuum, whether you're in a full-time role with nobody who can give you feedback, or whether you're freelancing on your own and you can't get feedback on your work. Feedback is the most important thing that you can get to learn. That is the only way that I am in my position that I can actually give feedback now to other people, is because I got and listened to all the feedback that people had for me in the past. So I would recommend trying to go for a full-time role. It was really helpful. It also helped me understand the product and the tech industry. So that's something else that you need to do, whether or not you're transitioning from academia or anywhere else. If you haven't been in the product or tech industry, it's really helpful to go and understand that. One thing that I did, because I didn't know really that much about like agile and like lean and like sprints, and how sprints worked and how to work user research into like the product development phases. So what I did is I reached out to, so first off, Reddit is great. So ask Reddit. But I reached out to several like product managers and designers and devs, so people that I knew that I would be working with in the future, and I asked them if I could interview them. So I interviewed them about their responsibilities, their goals, and if they've ever worked with user researchers before, like how it was, what they wish it would be better, like what went well. So that's something else that I would really recommend doing, is reaching out to like adjacent departments so that you can get an understanding. So like if you've never had the experience of working with a product manager before, and like that comes up in your interview, what you can say is like, hey, actually, like I spoke to like, not a lot, but I spoke to a few product managers on how they've worked with user researchers before, and this is what I gathered. And so this is how I would think about it. That shows, I had people do that in interviews before, like more junior research candidates, and I was just blown away. Like I was like, you are awesome. Like the fact that you went ahead and did that and did your research, like that also shows me that you're a researcher, right? You're going and you're trying to find information to synthesize it and like make it better, right? And like put something into action. So I would really highly recommend that. From freelance, I went back into full-time roles because I wanted the security of a full-time job. And I also ended up moving to Germany, and I needed a full-time job in order to have a visa there. So I worked at a variety of full-time roles until my husband and I moved over to Jersey, which is where we are now and where I am currently sat, Jersey Channel Island. So it's in the UK, off the coast of France. It's really cute. It's really pretty. I really highly recommend Googling Jersey cows. They're very, very cute. So with that shift, I decided to go full-time on my job, my own business, which is my job, mentoring other people in user research. And the way that I did that, if you are curious and if you're ever thinking about doing something like that, I went about it in the sense that I did a lot of this for free while I was doing full-time roles. So when I moved to Germany, a lot of people had started asking me like, hey, do you have advice on this or that? And so I started giving advice for free. I also started meeting people for free. And so I had a few mentees, I guess, where I was helping them with different things, giving them feedback on what they were doing. I also held a few free introduction to user research courses where I went through and helped people like build some of the foundational skills for user research. I currently have a self-paced course, which is pretty awesome. So like I really go through like the foundations of user research in that course. So if that's something that you're looking for, you can find a link to that in the description. It's a super course. It's really in depth, I would say. And I do encourage you to do a project alongside the course. So that might be a good opportunity for you to use that course as a way to build those skills and practice them through a personal project to build that first case study. So I did a lot of this stuff, as I said, for free, for, I don't know, 2-3 years. I started charging probably after like year 2, a little bit, and to see if the business idea was viable, and then continued to, work on it alongside my full-time role, which meant, like I would hold classes on the weekend or do meet with mentees on the weekend. It was really tough for a while. It felt like all I was doing was research all the time. And then I finally decided when we moved here to completely do it full time. So that is where I am right now. I do consult every once in a while. Another thing that I did was I started writing regularly. 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago. And that was very helpful. As I said, I love writing. So that was a way for me to get my advice out into the world for other people, to help them, if it resonates with them, maybe help them avoid some of the mistakes that I made, or at least lessen the blow of them, because I made plenty. And so, that was very helpful in terms of getting my brand off the ground. So people started recognizing me for my writing. And you'll also see that I post on LinkedIn a lot to try and help people. So I give I try and give as much free advice through my articles and freebies and LinkedIn content as possible. And then I have several tiers of charging, of like smaller amounts of like webinars, more medium amounts of my courses, and then higher amounts for like company workshops, consultancy, and mentorship, one-on-one mentorship. So that's kind of how I got there. Now, advice for people who are transitioning. Bloom's taxonomy is something that's really interesting when it comes to learning. So Bloom's taxonomy of learning, it's a pyramid that talks through like how people learn. And there is, the first building blocks are things like gaining knowledge, right? Like you're building your knowledge. And then what you're doing is you're kind of like applying that knowledge. And then afterwards, you're synthesizing and kind of explaining that knowledge to other people. So that's kind of what I would recommend doing, is like reading and building that knowledge through reading books. And I will link to some of the resources. So I will say I used to write on Medium, but there's a lot out there, and it can be really overwhelming for people who are new to the field to like read one thing that says like, talk to 5 to 7 users only, and then read another thing that's like, that's not right. So like, what I would recommend doing is starting with some of the books, or starting with some of the more, validated resources. One thing that you can do is if you're interested in super valid resources, I have a bi-weekly newsletter where I put together 5 of the like top things that I found in the past 2 weeks that are all valid and have really like legit information in them. So you can also pop into and subscribe to that newsletter if you want. Also, description in the description. So that all being said, you need to build some foundational knowledge. So whether that be through books or podcasts, another great thing to look at is courses. So I mentioned my course in order to like build those skills. And then I also mentioned like interviewing stakeholders. So similar departments that you would be working with, but try and interview some user researchers as well to ask them about their job and like synthesize that information. You can also do desk research. So secondary research, looking up job descriptions and what that entails, looking at people's LinkedIn, looking at people's case studies. To see kind of like what they're doing. So some of that desk research. So first you have to kind of like build that knowledge, and then you have to apply it. So what I did, as I said, is I built knowledge. So I read a lot of books. I listened, there weren't really podcasts back then. So I read a lot of books. And I did talk to researchers, designers, product managers, developers to kind of like understand the ecosystem that I would be working in and how I might work with them. So I did that. I networked. So I went to different meetups, and trust me, I hate networking. I'm an introvert. I'm not a huge fan of like those kinds of settings. I found it really difficult and overwhelming. But I went anyways and tried to like learn, and like went to conferences and listened to talks. I listened to some very bad ones. I read some very bad stuff. You can't hide from it. It's just the world in which we live in now. There's a lot of stuff out there, but do your best in trying to find maybe like, as I said, I will link to recommendations, but like some of the more valid resources out there. So that, and then you start applying. So whether you volunteer, whether you would do a hackathon, or again, easiest solution, find something that matters to you. Another thing that I did is there was an adoption agency that I worked for, like an animal shelter / adoption, dog adoption, cat adoption that I volunteered for. And what I did is I took their website and did some usability testing on it, and I sent them like the information. But they didn't ever get back to me. So it's totally fine if you want to like take a company and like do some testing for them, and always like feel free to send them the results. But they might not get back to you. They don't have to. Like these things can be like your own. Just choose something that you really care about, because that will genuinely, it shines through so much when you can tell that it's something that somebody really cared about, and we're really curious about inherently. So then that's like applying the knowledge. So doing the case study, or not doing the case study, but like doing the research and building that case study. And then like the synthesis is like bringing that case study together and being able to explain it to other people. So before I went into my interviews, what I did is I tried to explain my case studies to people who would not understand anything. So like I took, like my mom is not technology oriented. And I walked her through my case study to see if she could understand it. Right. And what questions she had. I did my case study to myself in the mirror, and I recorded myself and listened back. Also take a look at the STAR method of answering interview questions and trying to set yourself up for success when you're explaining an example of something that you did. The STAR method is really great and very popular. So by being able to present and explain that case study, that is a form of that synthesis. So that's that kind of like whole process. Of course, you can do it on higher levels. Like, so for instance, like I built all my knowledge. I applied it through my jobs, and now I'm synthesizing by teaching others how to do the job, right? But let's take it on that smaller scale of like learn the stuff, apply the stuff, so practice it, and then synthesize it into a case study and be able to like explain that to somebody, right? So I would say that would be like my advice. Again, like take a look at the information in the description, like all the different resources and links, because that will be really helpful maybe in getting you started on like these actionable things that you can do. One other thing that I just want to say, you don't need a degree unless you are going for a company that might require one. So for instance, if you're going for like the bigger companies, let's say Facebook or Google, they might require a PhD. I am not a huge fan of working for big companies, so my master's didn't really apply. I think it maybe helped me a little bit, if I'm being honest, in getting my first internship. It might have helped, but to be completely fair, the amount of work that I did that was qualitative in my master's was rather low. Like I had more of a statistical background, which I hated. So in the end, it didn't really help me that much. Not to say that it wouldn't help anybody, but I just am here to say that likelihood is, just in like with the exception of some of the bigger companies, that if you're trying to break into user research, you don't need an advanced degree. You don't need a certificate. Do not need a certificate in anything. Certifications are a very interesting, requires another video. Certifications to me are not an indication of anything necessarily. If you completed a course, that's great, but I care more about how you went out, researched, and applied that information. So a certificate does not necessarily guarantee you anything. It's kind of like, how did you take that knowledge and like continue it forward and apply it? So yeah. I hope that was helpful for you. And I'm just here to say that like anybody can get into user research, like if you have empathy for people. So if you have a degree of empathy, but most importantly, I would say if you are inherently curious. So I am just like a super curious person. I love to like know how people think about things. Like you will see like, at parties, like I will just talk to people, like I will just keep asking them questions, and like they're like, I just spilled my entire life story to you, and I'm like, I know, it's fascinating, right? And I'm like, I have not spoken, so I'm just like super curious person. I can talk to anybody about anything, right? And of course, that's honed over the years because, as I mentioned, I'm quite introverted, and that was not always easy for me. But I've always been a curious person, and I think that curiosity is a really great tool in user research, because what that allows you to do is take a step back of like in qualitative interviews. So like one-on-one interviews, I would be like, oh my God, what question am I supposed to ask? What am I supposed to say next? Like all these things. And when I kind of like dropped that, and when I was like, I'm just going to be curious, that's when I kind of made the shift into like better understanding how to talk to people about things. So for instance, you'll see it if I ever come to your company workshop and we're doing a workshop on generative research, I will, without any planning, be like, tell me a topic that somebody like knows about. And so like in one of my previous workshops, somebody was like, refrigerators. I just bought a refrigerator, and literally, like, without any context, we just started having like a one-on-one interview, like where I was like, tell me about the time when you bought it. And like, they went through it, and it was like a 15-minute interview with absolutely no prep from my side, because I am inherently curious. So like, you will get to a point where that can happen. It just takes some time. But I would say that if you have this sense of curiosity, if you have this sense of empathy for others, you're in a very good place as a user researcher. Of course, it helps to have skills, visual skills. I have none, so it's not 100% necessary. It helps to be a good communicator. That's definitely something that I had to work on, like a good facilitator and communicator. Good written skills are nice, but not necessary. So overall, I think just being really curious and wanting to help others. That is what I would say it comes down to. Technical skills you can kind of learn. So this is a long video. I'm going to stop talking now. I hope that this was helpful for anybody who is listening. As I said, like, check out the links in the description. And I hope to see you and talk to you soon. And I wish you the best of luck in your journey to user research. Thank you.